Hey everybody, welcome to our webinar. Today we're going to talk about how to use GoLand more effectively. We will talk about debugging features, editing features, refactorings, and let me present to you our guest, Florin. You may know him from our previous webinars. You may know him from Twitter. His username is Del Sniper. If you don't follow him, follow him. Hey Florin.
Hi all,
Florin.
nice to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Great. So also today with us GoLand team lead Artem Khvostanov and the developer Murat Habibulin. Hey guys. So answer to the most popular questions. Yes, this webinar is being recorded. Also, you can ask questions at any time, and during the webinar we will have some time to answer them. So don't be shy, just write the questions in the questions section. And I guess that's enough of me talking. Florin, the floor is yours.
Cool, thank you, Sergey. First of all, sorry you can't see me. Unfortunately, technical difficulties prevent me to do that. Nonetheless, I hope you'll enjoy the presentation. And if you do have questions, please ask them. My colleagues or friends are happy to help out and reply to them. So without wasting more time, let's see the debugger in action. And I'm going to start by showing you one of the coolest features that you can use, but it's available only for Linux users. And let's jump into it. So what I'm about to show you is how you can record and debug your application. And this is a recording. Maybe you see the play pause icons on the corner on the screen. That's because I'm presenting from a Windows operating system, so I had to record this on a Linux system. As I said, the feature is only available for Linux systems. And let's dive a bit into what just happened here before we move forward. We've launched the debug configuration by saying at this point, record and debug. So when I selected this option here, that's available only for the systems that supports this feature. And then the IDE launched the compiler. It compiled everything that it needed using Go build, and then run our binary using the Delph debugger. With a bit of a twist, instead of the regular debugging session, the backend was changed to RR, and I'll dive into that in a second. So our application started working, and you see some output from it, such as initializing the server and starting the server. There are also some timestamps here that you may notice, and keep an eye on those because those are useful for what we are about to see. Now, my application ran just fine. It's working, and at some point I've got an error. It says error, and then my error here, and then I see the initializing the server and starting the server messages again. You may wonder, okay, what just happened and why do I see those again? Is that the application malfunctioning or what? Well, if we look closely at the timestamps here, you'll see that the message about the server being initialized has the same timestamp, so 12:11:56, as the first message has. Moreover, we know that the error happened at 12:12:06, so it's about 10 seconds after the server was supposedly initialized, right? Is this some kind of magic, or did we just time traveled? And the answer is we time traveled. It's not magic. That's what the backend RR does. What just happened is Delph invoked the RR project, which took a snapshot of the running application, and that application just happened to panic or exit. And when that happened, Delph started replaying that snapshot. So when the replay happened, everything that our application had as a state was replayed as it happened. So that means, in our case, the time is the same time as the execution time rather than the correct current time. So why is that useful? That is useful because, as it's the case with my application, which had a problem, I can set a breakpoint inside the application wherever I got, let's say, the error message. And in this case, we can see it here. And when the replay happens, the debugger will stop the application at the specified breakpoint. Why is that cool? Well, that's cool because we can then see the state of our application at that very moment when it had the problem. So, for example, I can see that the request ID here had a value of 801, and our HTTP request was made for the product page, the ABC 801 product. So that helps me understand what's going on in the application and have a way to check whenever I have problems with my application to reproduce those and go over all the variables, go over all the state that it has to make sure that everything is in place or detect where the problem is. Now, for the first-time users of GoLand, there's a lot of things happening on the screen right now, and I'm going to break them down in a bit. But I wanted to start with this cool example because it's one of the features that, unless you're on Linux, you may not know of it. But if you are, or you can get a snapshot using Mozilla RR, and I'll talk about how to do that in a bit, then you may not know that this kind of debugging is possible with GoLand. And because this kind of debugging is possible with GoLand, it means that you can start exploring your application in a whole new light, and you can make sense of errors and states in a much different way. You imagine having a very complex application, not just a toy example like this one, having a problem that you can only reproduce maybe once every 1,000 requests. Having a way to record your application will make that a lot easier to replicate, analyze, and fix in the end. So let me discuss a bit about what's on screen now. At the bottom, you'll see the debugger tool window. And this has multiple tabs, one of them being the Go Build tab, so what we call a run configuration for our application. And then there are a couple of tabs, either the debugger or the console. The debugger holds the view for our Goroutines, and for each Goroutine you can see the stack trace for it. And you can also see on the right side the variables and watches. Now, the variables are what's part of the request. Watches are everything that you set as a watch for a variable or for an expression. On the console tab, you'll see your application output. So everything that's written in the console is basically what your application writes to std out or std error. And then you have a few other buttons, such as toggling between the run modes. So for example, you have the step into, step over, step out of execution, or the evaluate button. Now, I can press anywhere next to a line on the editor gutter on the left side, and I can press put a breakpoint. So I'm at line 70. I just put a breakpoint at line 66. Why did I do that? Because when I'm debugging using Mozilla RR, there's a special button here called Rewind. That rewind gives us the ability to jump back in time, in execution time at least. And that allows us to understand what happened at a previous point in our execution. So for example, when I press rewind, I get to see that I have far fewer variables defined and available here, because these lines, the request ID and request variables, have never been initialized at that point. So let me go a bit back in the video. You can see the variables here, request ID and request variable. And when I press rewind, bam, they disappeared because they are not there anymore. This functionality is not limited just to going back and forth. You can jump in your source code, and you can also put a breakpoint there. Moreover, you can use conditional breakpoints, such as what I'm about to do here. If you right-click on a breakpoint, or you invoke the shortcut Control Shift F8 on Windows and Linux, then you can set conditions for your breakpoint or toggle different other settings. Again, something we'll see in a bit. It's a lot more powerful than what I'm describing it right now. So for example, let's say I have this condition about the request ID being less or equal than 600. When I press done, now the breakpoint will have a different icon here with a question mark, because that means it has a condition attached to the breakpoint itself. And let me press rewind again. It's going to jump back to the product 797, because, well, that was the product that made it jump. But our earlier breakpoint was not hit yet. Why is that? Because we haven't reached that far into the execution timeline. What we can see from here is another useful feature. It's the ability for us to jump using the step over part. So not only you can go back in time, you can also move forward in time using tools such as step over and step into. You can also take snapshots of your whole application Goroutines using the dump Goroutine feature. And I'll discuss that in a bit. Just know that this is possible, and you can see a list of all the Goroutines running in your application. Okay, so what's next? If I press again rewind, let me remove that breakpoint for you. We need to wait a bit, because clearly the execution took a bit longer than needed, especially if we want to go back in time for a long period of time, right? So moving forward is easy. Moving backward means undoing all the operations. And at some point, we'll hit the breakpoint that we've set earlier about the request ID being 600 or less. And there it is. Now, I can see that happening. And I also can see that I can, again, take a dump of all the Goroutines. And this is maybe useful if you want to compare what's happening in your application at various points in time. And then I can continue basically running using step over, step into, and so on to make sure that my application runs as expected. Okay, so this is it with the video. Let me bring up quickly the page here with the RR project. And you'll see that this is the project that I mentioned as a backend for Delve. You need to have this installed on your computer. And as I said, it works on Linux for now. You have a bunch of documentation. It's available if you search on Google for RR project. Actually, let me show you how I did it. So yeah, you just search Mozilla RR, and you have the GitHub project and the project page itself. I believe the project page is very useful, so don't jump directly to the GitHub project just yet. And here you'll get through all the steps and features that you can use. There are some useful guides into how to get started with this project, and it gives you an idea on how to build this for your operating system, and it mentions what are the changes, if any, that you may need. You have some usage instructions, which are very helpful. And you also have some limitations. And this is pretty important because some of these limitations you may bump into and you may not realize why it's not working. So one of the limitations that you have is that this emulates a single core machine, meaning that for all intents and purposes, your Goroutines will all be scheduled into one single CPU core rather than maybe on your 16 or 64 threads machine. This may affect somehow the way your application works, but I've never encountered this problem so far, and it generally was more useful to run with RR and find the bug a lot quicker than I would have otherwise. You need a relatively modern CPU, and generally Intel CPU are well supported. Some AMD CPUs are supported too, but the patches are not that stable yet, I would say, for those class of CPUs. And you also have a limitation about the virtual machines. So for example, let's say you are like me, you're running Windows and you want to use Mozilla RR in a virtual machine using Linux. You can do that as long as you have a few things in place that your virtual machine supports. I jumped into the wiki. Actually, I can jump into the usage page directly. And from there, you'll find a lot of assistance on, okay, what do you need to do and what applies when it applies. You also can run this in Docker because that's a popular question. What if I have Docker and can I run this in Docker? Yes, you can. There's a special page. So if you search for Docker here, you'll find it. And if you want to run RR inside Docker, then you need to make sure that you launch your container with a few additional options. Otherwise, yeah, it's not going to work. Generally, this is kind of needed anyway for running Delve in the first place. So if you plan to debug your containers, that's one way to do this. Okay, cool. So yeah, I've shown you one of the coolest features that GoLand has for debugging, but let me make sense of all these surrounding features that I've shown you. Well, let's start from the beginning here. What I have is the main function. And why is my IDE looking like that? Well, I'm in Zen mode. So if you don't know what Zen mode is a way for you to focus on your code without having all the other IDE windows in place. So I'm pressing Shift to find the search everywhere feature to execute that one. And then you can just call Zen mode. And when you toggle this one, you can focus on your code. By default, you'll have this view. I generally like to have the line numbers shown, and I like to have the gutter icons too. And that's because it brings a bit of convenience to the whole usage. Now, with that in place, let's start our application. So as I've shown you on the video, on Linux, you'd have a third option here to debug, which is called record and replay, right? Unfortunately, that's not available on Windows, so we'll have to make do with debugging our application the classic way. Now, GoLand does everything automatically for you. You don't have to worry about compiling the application with some flags to enhance your debugging experience and so on. And when that's done, you'll see the debugger tool window, which I mentioned earlier. You have the same experience, regardless if you are running on Windows, Linux, Mac. It's all good. You can run this on Macs with Intel CPUs or with the Apple M1 CPUs. It's going to be the same thing. And let's jump a bit more into our whole debugging tool window and what's going on here. Now, my application is running, and there's nothing for me to do here. However, whenever the application runs, I can still press the dump Goroutines button. And when I do that, let me make this a bit bigger. I get to see a list of all the Goroutines in my application. I can also stop the application from running in the background. So once you take a dump of the Goroutines, you can terminate your application, leave it running. That's totally up to you. And what we'll see here is we have a few information about what was happening at the point in time where I took the dump. We have a few Goroutines here that are, let's say, the internal Goroutines. And we also have some Goroutines that have a number next to them. What that number means is that's the number of Goroutines which have a similar stack to one of another Goroutine that maybe waits in the runtime call wait. Or for example, if I'm looking at maybe, let's say, time sleep here, I can see that the Goroutine that I'm looking at is product handler. Now, this is done by default, and all the stacks are merged like that so that you don't get this cluttered view of what's going on. You can click on the button on the left top side of the toolbar to make sure that you get a nice compressed view. Otherwise, you can expand them if you need them. The idea will also tell you, hey, there are in total 78 Goroutines that were active. And out of those, 19 were having unique stacks. So basically, the others were duplicates of existing Goroutines. What if I want to search for something? How do I do that? Well, you can bring the filter in place. And let's say I'm looking for the product, right? So if I start typing, I'll get to see the function that I'm looking at and see all the Goroutines that were running. So that way you can determine if something is running in your application or not at the time you took the Goroutine dump. And you can see there are two different unique stacks, and one of them is the products handler, and one of them is the product handler. In total, 4 Goroutines that are shown. Let's say I want to hide the products handler Goroutines because they are not interesting. I can right-click on that, and I can say hide all the Goroutines. And now they will be hidden. You can still see them if you really want to. And you can also choose to unhide them if you discover that, hey, I maybe wasn't supposed to hide them. So you can also hide individual Goroutines if those would be ungrouped. And you can even export this to a text file so that you can parse them at your own convenience. So this is what the other advanced feature of GoLand is doing. It basically allows you to understand what's going on in your application with regards to the Goroutines that are or not running in your code. It's super useful, especially if you want to detect Goroutine leaks. Let's say you launch a Goroutine that never ends in the background, then you launch another one, then you not launch another one. And at some point when you take a dump, you'll see that, hey, there maybe are, let's say, 200 coroutines that you thought are supposed to finish, but they never do. So you can have an understanding of what's going on in your application using this feature. And let me go back and launch the application again. This time around, since we use the products handler, actually, let me search for this one. Or let's go for the product handler. Okay, so in the product handler here, let's put a breakpoint because this is quite fun to observe as a behavior. Let's launch the application again. Okay, the debugger stopped. And I see a bunch of information on screen, and let's make sense out of that information, what's going on here. First, we have the inline view for variables in the debugger, which is super helpful because it means you can focus your eyes on the code and you have the variables right there for you. You can select one of the variables, and then you can click on it, right? And you can see what values it holds. So that's super useful. Instead of you going all the way here, actually, let me delete this because it's a bit of a spoiler. So instead of going all the way down here and start expanding and so on, you can do that inline where your eyes are. So you can focus more on your code, move your eyes less up, down, or whichever way you have your IDE set up to display the debugger to a window. Another feature is the fact that, let's say I want to jump into the execution of this line, but I'm not interested in the header function because for whatever reason, I believe that the header function works as expected. Maybe I debugged it in a previous run. I trust that function, but I want to get to the set function. So normally, if I do a step into, which you would normally do using the button here or the dedicated shortcut, and I'm going to choose the shortcut, you'd have the header function shown up, right? So it's not exactly what we wanted to do. How do we fix this? Let's rerun this quickly and see if there's another way to do this. Now, this is a bit of a hidden feature, maybe not that much for some of you, but if you go to the Run menu and you select from there the breakpoint actions, and you have Smart Step Into. Now, it has a dedicated shortcut, which is useful, and I think it's more useful than you going to the Run menu and all the way to the debug action. And that's called Shift F7. And you can see at the bottom of the screen the shortcuts I'm pressing. I'll try to say them, but if I forget to say them, then yeah, you can look into those. And they are displayed for Windows, Linux, and Mac. Back on track. So I press Shift F7, and this time around, instead of jumping into the header function, I'm prompted with a different visual cue. Now, the header function is highlighted, but if I press the down arrow, the set function is highlighted. I can press up arrow, header is selected again, down arrow, set is selected. So this allows me to select which function I want to step into. How do I do the stepping into? Press enter. And just like that, I avoid jumping into my header function and jump already to the set function. This means in a function chain call, I can jump straight to the function that I'm interested in rather than having to go through all of them. And from there, yeah, you can continue doing whatever you want to do. So pretty much, yeah, it's a convenience feature, which is a bit hidden, but since you're watching this webinar, now you know about it. Okay, so I got a bit deeper into my code. How can I get out? Well, I can get out using the step out feature. And the more I press it, the more I'm going to step back out from the stack trace. The stack trace being this one here. Now, I can go evaluate all the stack trace as I want, all the way back to, well, the Go runtime itself. So I can view the assembly point which triggered this, or I can go back to wherever I want. I can also expand my variables here. And let me show you another neat feature of GoLand. The fact that while W is a response writer interface, so we know that because, well, we can invoke the documentation, right? I can see the actual type that's implementing that interface, which is used for my variable. So imagine a case where you maybe had multiple types implementing an interface, all cool, but at some point you realize that instead of, let's say, going to the cache for a request, your request was going to the database, because while they both implement the same store interface, the wrong object was there, and it was hard to find that out. GoLand allows you to see that feature directly, and yeah, understand, hey, which type is actually behind my interface. Similarly, let's say you do need some pointers, right? Let's say we have the pointer to the HTTP connection. You have the address next to it, and that's super useful in some cases where maybe doing some usage of pointers results in two different objects. You don't have different pointers having the same pointer. So updating one value resulted in updating the other value too. That's what GoLand does here, and that's why you see the pipe between these. I promised I'm going to show you something else when I said that I don't want to spoil a feature. And that is something that's available for you in 2021.2 and newer versions. And that is the inline watch. So let's say you evaluate an expression such as, let's say, R vars. Here, you get to see the contents and so on, and then you decide, oh, okay, maybe I want to add the watch here to see R vars always, right? Completion works. Perfect. What happens if I jump into the FMT function now? So let's jump into. You'll see the could not find symbol for R vars. That is not particularly nice to see, especially if you have a long list of values that you're watching. So is there any better way to handle this? If we go here to R vars and we right-click on that, you can say add inline watch. And when you do that, a new option will be shown here called inline watch, and then your values will be shown. So let me restart the debugging process quickly and show you this one. So now I'm stepping into inline watch was hidden. Pretty nifty, right? So I think it's pretty useful to keep your state visible only when you need it. And yeah, basically you get to have less clutter in the interface. It's always good to have that, right? There are a few other options that I'd like to show you about debugging and so on. So let me make some quick progress. One of the common questions is, how do I debug an already running application? For that, let me switch back here a bit. I'll copy this path and say Sorry for this. Let's bring up the built-in terminal. So normally I would say go build, let's say, demo exe. And now I can run demo exe here. My application is running in the system. If I go to run, I then have an option to attach to process. And I see two processes. One is Docker, which is written in Go, and the other one is my binary. Now, this stopped and it works. It's fine. I can use the smart step into, maybe step into things. But oh no, it didn't happen. Like, what's going on here? The problem with debugging an existing application is that you need to have it compiled to be debuggable. Otherwise, you may encounter optimizations. Those optimizations may hinder the debugging experience for you. So if I were to say, let's go back to the console and compile this with the correct flags, which are these. So you basically tell the compiler now, hey, I want you to disable all the inline optimizations and all other optimizations you're making. Now, if I run this and switch back to the debugger, I can say, well, attach once again. And I have my recent project, much better. I can select set as a function, and I'm stepping into. That's all nice and good. Remember to always compile your application with the debugger flags turned on so that it can be debuggable. But one other way to run applications actually is using what we call the run targets. So let's say we have this application, right? And when we click on the run button, we see another option, modify run configuration. What this does is it brings a window which allows you to modify your run configuration the way you want it. The run configuration is what tells your application how to compile, which environment variables to use, or what flags the Go tool should have when it compiles. For the debugger, you don't need to set the flags here. GoLand does it automatically. And what are your program arguments? So if you ever wonder, how do I pass an argument to my application? That's how we do it. So for example, if I were to say --help, I can do this here, or -help, depending on your flags. You can also say add an environment variable by clicking on the environment button here. By default, it has a list of all your environment variables the IDE could detect. So you maybe want to look into this one first. Otherwise, you can configure them here. So for example, I can say something like my environment equals my value. I don't know. So something like this. And yeah, the IDE will take care of this. You can also run with elevated privileges, which means that, let's say you have an application which needs special permissions, such as root user or administrator on Windows systems. When you need that, you don't need to run your IDE as root. All you need to do is edit the run configuration and say, hey, run this configuration as a root user. And the IDE will automatically do that for you. It's much easier and better than running the whole IDE as a root user, in my opinion. Okay, so back on why I was here in the first place, we can use the run targets feature, as I said. And here's a hint about it. You have a field called run on, and by default, it's either local machine, or you can create a new target. GoLand supports at the moment WSL, Docker, and SSH, meaning you can potentially run your application in a WSL environment, in a Docker environment, or through SSH on a remote system, entirely depending to your use case. So let's say I'm running this in WSL. GoLand will start up, and it's going to infer the environment itself. Actually, let me go here quickly because, yeah, manage targets is better. Same operation. You can select which WSL environment to use, so which Linux distribution you have. And once the IDE detects everything, you can review this and make sure that, hey, you have the correct configuration in place, all the variables are there. Click on finish, and you can give it a name if you want. I prefer to keep it as is. So now you can run this under WSL. And if I choose run here, it's going to start the application under WSL. It may take a bit because, well, it needs to populate all the caches and dependencies and so on. So yeah, now it runs on WSL. And how do I know that? Well, I built it on Windows because that is possible. We can cross-compile, right? And it's running the WSL path. There's another option. Here, I can say modify the run configuration, build on remote target. And that allows me to build my application in the remote environment. So in the Docker container or in the WSL environment or wherever in the SSH server I am. When you do that, bam, your application compiles. It's using clearly the WSL path, not the Windows path. And if I am to go to the terminal, actually, let me start a WSL command. I can say htop here. Now, this is not really friendly because htop, especially if you have a bigger ID size, doesn't show well. So let me move this to the editor and make a bit sense of what's going on here. When I run this again, well, there you go. I have my output right here, and I can see the path that's being executed and so on. So my application runs just fine here. Okay, I see we're getting close to the finish, and I want to show you a few other tips about how to actually edit the code that we've just seen. So I'm going to skip to that and take questions at the end of it. We'll have maybe 5-10 minutes to do that. You may be wondering, hey, Florian, what can you show me in 10 minutes to change my life on using the editor? So let's do just that. I'm going to go to this project here, which doesn't look like much, right? It looks like a hello world because it's a hello world. So let me show you a few features which will change how you look at the editing features. First of all, what if we want to take a message and make this a variable or a constant? What if we have it twice somewhere in the code? The same string or the same variable value or even the same code piece, right? So let's say I'm here and I'm pressing the refactor this button. Now you can access the refactor this using the refactor menu, refactor this. And I think this is one of the few shortcuts you need to always remember, refactor this. So refactor this, and then you can say, I want to introduce a variable or a constant. Let's introduce a variable here. Well, sorry. Let's introduce the variable. And the IDE will be helpful and say, hey, what do you want to make a variable out of? Do you want the expression, this expression, or hello world? I want just the message, hello world. And when that happens, I get a chance to say, hey, I want to replace only this particular occurrence of the value, or I want to choose all of them. Let's go with all of them. Great. Now, if I press refactor this, I can do the opposite. I can say inline. But I prefer it this way. So next, I know that this function, print, returns an error. So can we return an error from it? Yes, we can. There's a postfix completion. So postfix completions are completions that are used after you type your expression. And it allows you to enhance the code you've just wrote and surround it with a code template. If I type the var check error, and by the way, the shortcut that I'm pressing VCE works for other completion items too. So it's basically allowing you to narrow down the items that you want to type by pressing just a few letters from them. So if I do that, I can say, oh, well, this is the way that I'm handling the error. Of course, you can say maybe here I want to panic. Now, that's all nice and good, but what if I want to modularize this? So one way to do this would be I can take all the code here. I can say refactor this, and I can say extract method. Extract method, let's say greeting. And yeah, that looks good. Now I can have this return an error. So I can go to the function itself, or I can say refactor this. Look how much I'm using just a single shortcut, the refactor this shortcut, and say change the signature. Now this brings a very useful feature. It's called the result parameters part, or the parameters part. The whole idea of refactoring a signature is that allows you to change the function signature as you need. So let's say I'm going to refactor this into the error type. You can get completion here for name, for type, for default values, for everything. By default, I can leave the value empty, and I can say, okay, do the refactoring for me. So now I can maybe have a different way to do this. I can say fmt error f dot error, and then I can press Alt Enter. Alt Enter brings the context menu. The context menu will say add a format string as an argument. When I press that, I can say, well, I want to return the error itself. By default, it's V as a type, but you can also choose W to surround your error. And now I can just return this as I would. Perfect, looks good. With one exception. There's a red, yellow warning here, and if I see now, there are a couple of arrows that allow me to navigate to the next error. I can press the shortcut, which I love, the highlight next error or previous error. And I think this is one of my most used shortcuts. And this is going to give me a lot more information. I can see that I'm not handling that error. Cool, so let's handle the error. I can press the handle error shortcut or see more actions. And let me just see more actions first. I can either explicitly ignore this and not report it, or handle the error. Perfect. So now, again, handling the error. How can I make this even better, you may ask? Well, one way to do this would be to move this into a separate file. Can I make that from, can I do that from GoLand? Oh, yes, yes, I can. Let's place the cursor on the symbol that I want to do and say, refactor this. Who knew, right? And press the move option. Now I'm presented with this option here. I'm happy with this one. Let's say greeting. Yes, maybe the greet file here, greeting package. Yeah, it all looks good. Refactor. Oh no, I have a problem now. See, so the IDE noticed that I have an unexported function that I want to move, or better said, an unexported symbol that I want to move. That symbol can't be accessed from another package if I move it unexported. So what can we do? Well, we can show the conflicts, or we can continue if we really know what we are doing, or we can press cancel and say, I want you to export this. And when you do export and press refactor again, bam, you exported this. Let me add a quick comment here just to make sure that, you know, we are properly documenting our source code. And if I go back to the main file using the switcher, so that's a neat way to switch quickly between files. You can also use the recent files, or you can see only the edited files that you've changed recently, pressing the same shortcut. You can even go to things like, I don't know, let's say the Git tool window. And if I press that, well, I see the Git tool window. Okay, that's not that exciting. What's exciting is that the IDE did the automatic importing for me here and changed everything. But it's not following the GoFMT-local standard. How can I change that? Well, press the preferences or settings shortcut, which allows you to go to file settings or preferences on macOS. And here you have the editor option, code style, Go, and a world of options opens up, especially if you go for tabs, wrappings, imports, and others. Let's start with imports first. I want to select the Go imports style. I want to move all the declarations into a single declaration. I want to group all the standard library imports in a single place, and I do want to really have a single group because it can happen that Go imports adding to the last in the item in the list, it makes that mistake, but I want to have everything neat in a single place. And finally, I can group items. I can say, oh, okay, I want this to correspond to, let me make this a bit bigger, github.com, my company. You can also say, let's say, awesome project. I believe that's the name of our project. Some project one. And now it's going to group those. And then when I'm back, bam, just like that, it's automatically added there. Not only that, but let's say I'm removing the dependency here. Right, I reformatted the code which removed the unused dependency, and I say greeting. Well, the IDE is smart enough, knows what to complete. I want the message. Perfect, and it adds everything in the correct place. There's one little feature that you may also want to enable. It's the reformat using GoFMT after the reformat step from the IDE, just in case you want that extra assurance that it's going to run GoFMT for you. So you can enable that from the editor, code style, Go, other, on reformat, run GoFMT. Bang. And yeah, one last feature. Actually, two more features. Let me give you two more features. Super useful. Let's say I have a big comment here, right? Like a long comment. What can I do? First of all, I can press Alt-Enter, fill paragraph. This will restructure things a bit, but not quite that much. What can I do is I can also force the IDE to always add a leading space except for whatever. And I can also tell it in the others section from the code style Go, fill paragraph with. And I can, let's say, 60 or 80, depending on what's your documentation standard. I can press that again, fill paragraph. bam, your comment's much more readable. And finally, one of the features that I love. Let's say I have a JSON. Who here doesn't have a JSON API to deal with? So when I paste the JSON, you can see it in the background. It's all there, it's pasted. But the idea was like, hey, I noticed you're pasting JSON. Want me to convert that to Go because you're in a Go file? And you can say, yeah, sure, why not? Let's see what the IDE does. So here I'm using the utrack response for users. And bam, I have the type itself. Not only that, I can go here and say, hey, this looks repetitive enough. Refactor this, introduce type. And it's going to ask me, which one of these do you want, the structure or the whole slice? And yeah, the structure is enough. I can call this utrack user. And bam, my type is now a lot better and more structured. And I can continue this. So I can say, I can filter out quickly things in the IDE, right? And I can say introduce type. And this one is the utrack profile type. And yeah, you guessed it. I'm going to do this for the email type too, just because it's so nice to have this so useful and readily available. Utrack email. And from that JSON that we tried to paste earlier, now that's what I call productivity to the max. It's all formatted for me. It's all added with the JSON tags. It's perfect. Unfortunately, we are running out of time quickly, and I'd like to have a few minutes for questions and answers, especially if my friends would like to join up on stage. And yeah, let's talk a bit about your questions.
Yeah, right. So the first question is, we already answered one, and there's also a question about the project, and it was, I guess it's a question about where can we find this tips and tricks repository? Do you have it on GitHub?
Right, so the tips and tricks repository, let me bring this up quickly, is under the github.com, JetBrains, and there's a GoLand tips and tricks repository, and you'll have all of these here. You can also see another repository, which is in a similar vein, called the What's New in GoLand, which is structured by the IDE release. So this allows you to see, hey, what was new in the release we just had in a couple of weeks, or actually a month ago, 2021.2, right? And yeah, you'll see everything here. You'll see the presentation, the webinar that was done for that release, and you'll have a bunch of options here. And finally, there's the GoLand guide, which is available under jetbrains.com/go/guide. And there you get to see the tips as they are, or you can go through playlists of tips, various tips that are present, or by topic. So for example, if you want to see more debugging tips, click topics and then debugging, and then you'll see a bunch more. Or you can see technologies. So for example, I want to see everything that's related to the web development. I haven't touched this. GoLand has some really awesome web development features that are inherited from WebStorm. Check it out if you do any front ends, especially JavaScript, TypeScript. It's super awesome to use, and I mean that. And also some database features that, yeah, if you're working with MySQL, MongoDB, or stuff like that, yeah, you can use them from here, and you can see some of the tips here. So some of the tips may have, for example, let's say a short video that, yeah, you can watch, and yeah, you can zoom in and see what's the power of GoLand when it comes to databases or web development.
Okay, thank you. Another question, can the paste logic work with YAML too?
Unfortunately, that is not possible right now, but I think it's a great feature suggestion. So one way to suggest such features, actually, let me exit the Zen mode quickly, is to go to help. And here you can contact support, submit a bug report, or submit feedback. So when you do that, you get in touch directly with the IDE team, with the GoLand team, right? And you can submit their feedback and say, hey, I've noticed this cool feature, but I'd like it for YAML, or maybe you want some other feature which is not present right now in the IDE. You can do that. Team is super responsive, so yeah, just contact them and it's going to be fine.
Great, thank you. And one more question. Hi, Florian, can you explain some of the use cases we can use Go in front-end applications, mobile applications or web applications?
That's a very good question. It probably is more related to why would you use JavaScript in the backend. It's being familiar with the stack. So, for example, you can compile Go applications using WASM, so WASM, WebAssembly, and GoLand helps you with WebAssembly too. So you can go to Go and then you select build tags, and from here you can say, hey, I want to target the whatever architecture WASM has. And yeah, you'll be able, there you go, the WASM architecture. So you can edit files that are compiled to that. Why would you want to do that? Well, frankly, again, because you're familiar with that. There may be some speed benefits in some cases, but for example, you may also incur some penalty for downloading files because you need to download the Go runtime. WASM doesn't support the garbage collector yet, and so on. For mobile applications, you can connect to backends easier. So for example, if your backend is written in Go, you have all your client libraries and so on. You can deploy them on an Android app in a native format, in a binary format, and access them from the Kotlin application or whatever you're writing your application into, and have that testing done easier because you can do integration testing, right, between your client libraries and the Go thing. But otherwise, yeah, I have to admit, I haven't played that much with this. Mostly backends are my thing with Go.
Okay, thanks. While we don't have other questions, but let's just give folks a couple of minutes, maybe something will come to mind. Let me ask Artem what are our plans for the next release, what are we working on?
First of all, hi everyone, and Florian, thanks for the great presentation. It is very, very insightful, well, as always. As to our plans, frankly, we don't have much. Typically, we have a long list of tasks, but in the next release, we want to cover two huge topics that basically occupy the most of our time. The first one, and it was actually, I think it's one of the most popular tickets on our issue tracker. It is about WSL support. And Florian has shown that one can run programs on WSL using the run targets feature. But typically, it is not always convenient because in this case, you need to have source code both on the local Windows machine, and then the IDE transfers it to the WSL. And the second problem is that the Go SDK has to be set up on both environments. So what we want to do in the next release, which will come out like somewhere end November, beginning of December, is that one will be able to open the WSL project directly from the Windows mount and use Go SDK from the Linux machine. So there will be no need to have the copy of the project and another Windows SDK to work with the source code. That's the first one. And the second one is about generics, because generics are coming to the language. One can already play with them in 1.17 by enabling some flags. And as far as I know, the team is targeting 1.18, Go 1.18 that should come out in February, typically, to bring generics to the language. And of course, the IDE has to support them. And I hope that Marat can, share, can tell us a little bit about what's going on with them. If he can figure out his problem with the camera.
Yeah, sorry, for some reason, I don't know, can you see me now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, for some reason I can't see any of you. Yeah, anyway, so yeah, we are working on generics. As John already said, we already had parser for them, so you can actually play with them a bit in the editor, so we'll be able to write some code and it will be syntactically correct from the IDE's point of view, but you won't get most of the code inside that you are expecting from the IDE. This is because we can't right now figure out the types of the generic function calls and any generic constructions, and we are actively working on that. So hopefully till the next release of the IDE, we will bring some type inference there, and so you will be able to enjoy the proper resolution, code completion, and things like that, even if you're using generics. So yeah, hopefully this will be done.
To add a bit more on top of the Marat's answer, so our plan for 2021.3, so the next release, is to have type inference and code resolution that's necessary for such features as go to declaration, find usages, code completion, code inspections to work. That's the minimal plan. And then we will start working on supporting generics in other parts of the IDE, such as refactorings, code complaints. Additionally, there is quite a few inspections that we can write because generics have their own problems. And for instance, it'd be nice to have a way to quickly convert existing methods to generic methods and so on and so forth. In the best case, such things will start appearing in the next release, but it's quite a lot of work. So we will continue working on these features in the next releases too.
Okay, thanks, Artyom. Thanks, Marat. And let me see if we have questions now. I think we're good. So I guess this is it. Thank you, Florin. Thank you for everyone for being with us today. And goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all. See you.
Bye.